All right, everyone. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our first DataBytes for 2024 with the National Consortium for Data Science. The topic is Becoming a Data Detective, Holding AI Accountable with Hilke Schellmann. Hilke is the author of The Algorithm, How AI Decides Who Gets Hired, Monitored, Promoted, and Fired, and Why We Need to Fight Back Now. We are so excited to host her today as she walks us through some key takeaways from the book. And just a heads up, we will definitely leave time for questions at the end of the webinar. So you'll want to be sure you stick around. But we have disabled the Q&A for attendees, and chat is open to message me directly. We do want to make sure that Hilke is allowed to present without distractions. So be sure to submit your questions and comments via the little plus sign in the columns of the Easy Retro board. We can drop that Easy Retro board in the chat again in just a moment. But just so all of you know, we will be walking through the instructions of how to add questions to that form when Hilke wraps up with her presentation. And I do not want to waste any more time. I'm so excited that Hilke is here today, and I'm going to give you the floor. Thank you so much, Hilke.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me here, and everyone who's joining us. Like I'm so excited to hear all the questions that I'm sure are going to come up in a minute. And I wanted to walk you all through sort of the idea, what do you do as a data detective? I want to share a little bit about what I found out on my detective journey into the heart of AI in the workplace, and why I think AI and high stakes decision making is one of the most important civil rights issues of our time. And I also want to empower you all to learn how to hold algorithms accountable. So I might be an unusual person in a data science webinar because I'm an investigative journalist. I don't really have a data background, but I've come to the space because we often say as investigative journalists, we need to keep the powerful accountable. But now that a lot of power is held, quote unquote, by algorithms, my mission for myself is I needed to expand my mission a little bit, and my mandate, is now to also hold AI and other algorithmic tools accountable, since some AI tools are now making powerful decisions about humans. So I want to show you today what methods I use to do this accountability reporting. And I hope that you'll all steal my methods and join me in this important work. Or, not only in the journalistic endeavors, but also like if your company wants to maybe use an AI tool, like maybe some of these methods will be helpful to test these tools. Because, I know that everyone wants to prevent harm. So I wanted to start with just telling everyone a little bit about the scope of these AI tools in the world of work, because I think many folks, haven't realized that hiring and work has undergone a silent revolution. So, for example, in November 2022, which is, already a year and change ago, HireVue, one of the largest vendors in the space that does one-way video interview where there's no human on the other side, and candidates get questions on their phones or on the desktop to answer. So you kind of like record yourself answering questions about the job. They announced that they had done their 30 millionth one-way video interview. Some of them are scored by AI, and some are just plain video recording. But I think the scope is just wide. And we also know that almost all Fortune 500 companies use algorithms in their hiring funnel, and almost all applicant tracking systems that many mid-sized and large companies use have now AI built in. I'm not, I can't tell you exactly which features are turned on and off. But we know that that technology exists and is out there. So we see AI being used to find candidates, to screen resumes, to do social media background checks, to do one-way video interviews. And AI is used to find people's personalities, while playing video games and hiring. So we see it all along the hiring funnel, as people say. And I also want to talk a little bit, my talk is mostly on AI tools and hiring, but I also want to talk about surveillance at work. And we also don't have official numbers here, right? Like no one has to register with any government agencies in the US if they use monitoring software work. But what we know is that 8 out of the 10 largest companies in the United States survey their workers. And we also know from a recent CNBC article that large employers, including Walmart, Delta Airlines, T-Mobile, and Chevron, Starbucks, are working with a startup called Aware that is checking employee Slacks, email, Zoom, Teams, and it's checking all the texts that employees generate for sentiment and infractions. So the company says its tool can identify bullying, harassment, discrimination, noncompliance, pornography, nudity, and other behaviors. But I wanted to take one step back to the beginning of all this, how I started doing all this, and it started with a very unlikely little story. I was in the back of a Lyft ride in late 2017, and I talked to the driver and I asked him how your day was, and he told me that he had a job interview with a robot, and I was like, what? A robot job interview? I've never heard of that. And that was sort of my beginning into this world. And when I went to some of my first conferences, I was just blown away what's out there. So I think to just like illustrate what's out there, I brought like a short video that I did for the Wall Street Journal. I think to really understand, okay, this is what was happening in 2018, and I'll talk about the changes since then. But it's a quick 2-minute video that I think will be helpful to understand how some of these technologies work.
We begin our exploration of the new world of hiring with a visit to the headquarters of one of the companies that's pushing the envelope, HireVue. Its artificial intelligence assessment tool is used by over 50 companies, including Unilever and Hilton, which both declined to comment. This, I'm told, is a typical digital interview for someone applying to become a customer service rep. It confronts me with several scenarios that, on the job, I might encounter.
If you can't help me resolve this right now, I'm going to take my business elsewhere.
I'm here to try to make things better.
I go into this knowing something that HireVue acknowledges many job candidates potentially do not, that my responses are being assessed not by human beings, but by AI, analyzing my tone of voice, the clusters of words I use, and my micro-expressions.
So here's what's wild to me. The notion of micro-expressions, is that what you're calling them?
It's the facial analysis software. It's capturing, if you think of facial movement, smiling, frowning, eyebrow movement, those are actual database points, and they roll together to give certain emotions and traits and personality and thinking style things.
Here I am.
Yeah.
I just did the interview for a job as a customer support representative. How'd I do?
The first thing is we look at the AI score that's attached to it, and you can see that up here. You scored at a 37%.
That's pretty good, right?
No, that's out of 100, right? So you're kind of in the bottom third, if you will, in that job, so you'd be a low match, essentially.
My rating is the result of HireVue's AI comparing my responses to those of actual employees. Essentially, my performance is being compared. My voice, my words, my facial expressions against a company's highest performers.
So you think if an employer were to see that number, would I be written off most likely? Would it be filtered out of the process completely?
No, absolutely not, actually. What we would recommend is that the candidates could be rank ordered by that, but they still go and look at the different videos.
So you're telling me that everybody who goes through this, they get seen by someone?
Can be. They want to watch all the videos.
But they might
or not.
decide, hey, this guy Jason only has 37%, not even worth our time.
If you score so low, they might say we may not watch all the videos, but they may watch a question.
So you see here that Nathan is trying to tell folks that companies, that HireVue suggests to the companies to watch some of these videos, although there is an AI score. And that leads me to one of the first methods that I use. So if I find out that a vendor, which are, I think always private companies, work with a government agency, I can use freedom of information requests to understand how are these systems set up, what goes into these systems. So I actually found out that HireVue was working with Atlanta Public Schools, and I filed a FOIA for all communication between HireVue and Atlanta Public School. And in one of the emails, I actually found Nathan describing that Atlanta Public Schools will use a cut score for all the interviews, that people who score less than 33% will get automatically rejected. So, it's not really surprising for assessments, but it was surprising because, HireVue kept saying, oh, we suggest that the companies watch these. And so that was kind of an interesting signal you might find in some of these FOIAs. Also, I wanted to say that there's no science underneath this method of analyzing people's facial expressions and their tone of voice. There's no science of facial expressions in job interviews to predict if we will be successful in a given job. There's also no science checking for intonation of our voices and how that may be causally related to success in a job. But I think what's helpful here to say is after I reported this in the Wall Street Journal, and Drew Harwell from the Washington Post had also a big expose on HireVue in the Washington Post. HireVue did phase out facial expression analysis. And also last year, the intonation of people's voices. Fortunately, they're a little bit in this field. It's kind of a little bit sometimes like a whack-a-mole. So HireVue is the largest vendor, so they have phased out this technology. But there's unfortunately sometimes a bunch of others that come up after that, and still use some of these methods. But I think what is helpful too for me is to obviously speak to scientists. I know a lot of reporters do that, and just understand okay, what is the science underneath here? Has this been proven? Is this valid? I think that's all really important questions. And then I also talk to a lot of employment lawyers and sort of people who are adjacent to employment lawyers, who are often brought in if a vendor wants to they market a new tool and a company wants to buy it. So some companies do they try to do due diligence, and they bring in, outside counsel, employment lawyers, or industrial and organizational psychologists to vet these technologies. And those are key sources for me. So what I learned about resume screeners who are super widespread, right? Because a lot of companies get millions of applicants. So I think IBM gets around 5 million applications and resumes every year. Google gets around 3 million. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. I think Goldman Sachs for the summer internship alone gets over 200,000 applications. There's just not a way that humans can look at all these applications. So companies want, and often I think there's a genuine need to have a technological solution. So resume screeners, at the sort of beginning of the funnel, are pretty popular. So when I talk to these employment lawyers and industrial organizational psychologists, I think what I learned was a little bit unsettling, that some of these tools, the way they're calibrated, may lead to biased keywords. So for example, in one of the tools, John Scott found that the word Thomas was a predictor of success in the role. So what has probably happened in the back end is that the tool was calibrated on resumes of people who were successful in the job, basically who had the job or were interviewed at one point. So you ingest all of those resumes into the tool, and it sort of tries to find statistically significance. And maybe there were a bunch of Thomases in the pile, so then suddenly Thomas was a predictor of success. And obviously in hiring, in marketing and social media marketing, some of these things, putting people in groups and looking for statistical significance may not be as problematic. But here in hiring, we obviously know that like our first names should have nothing to do if we are qualified for the job. John Scott also found words like basketball, football, Syria, and Canada that were predictors of success. And, you know, some of these could be really like, significant legal claims because, for example, Syria and Canada could mean that people were discriminated based on national origin. And another example, one of the employment lawyers I spoke to, Kenneth Wilner, found was that in one tool, the word baseball was a predictor of success if you had that word on your resume, and if you had the word softball on your resume was downgraded. So the job had nothing to do with sports, just a run-of-the-mill job. And I guess maybe the company was maybe a tech company or had gender disparities historically in their workforce. So maybe I found this statistically relevant. You know, there may be more men at the job and they like baseball. And, it's inferred that folks that have the word softball, which is, correlated with more women in the United States, were downgraded. So I think what might be helpful here is like sort of a tip for folks is like check the training data and ask skeptical questions, right? Like how was the training data derived that this predictive AI model was built upon? Are there potential biases built in? Like what are the consequences of some of these keywords that maybe some of these resume screeners use? So I think what might be helpful is checking what is the accuracy rate. So if it's like 80% accurate, where does this number come from? Is this really data tested on the wild with random, more randomized resumes? So is that on the holdout data set that the AI developers used? That has this accuracy. So if you use your own data set and have a holdout data set, your accuracy number should be really, really high. So I think questioning all of that is really helpful. And what helps me sometimes is like a coin toss has 50% accuracy, right? So like you need to have a really, really high number. And then on top of that, I think it's really helpful to talk about what are some of the, what are the technical requirements? So often companies put out technical reports to understand like how was the validity tested and how was made sure that there's no discrimination in these tools. And I would really scrutinize these technical reports and also force companies to maybe open the black box and understand, okay, what are these keywords that success is inferred upon? Because I think what I think a lot of data scientists, right, we think about like more data is better and correlation is important, and that might mean something. But in employment, like we really are looking for causal inferences, and statistical relevancy is not just that. And then I think what might also be helpful is like test these tools yourself. So in this case, I tested some AI-based interview tools. So one was marketed to companies overseas to hire, so companies in the West who may want to hire folks working in conference call centers overseas, like in the Philippines or maybe in India. And the one criteria is how well do these folks speak English is one of the criteria. So this AI tool was going to find out how well I speak English. And what's interesting, I sometimes talk about with vendors about like, what happens if you were an unusual case? What happens if you have an accent, right? Like, because the tool doesn't infer your English capability or how well you are qualified for a job based on the audio. It bases it on a transcription. So what if people who have accents, people who have a speech disability? Is the tool going to fairly be able to transcribe their words that they use? So what I've learned over time is that vendors tell me about a minimum threshold a candidate has to meet So I think that was kind of interesting to me. I don't really understand what this minimum threshold is, but I was like, okay, let's try some things out. So when I did, when I didn't answer anything and there was just silence, I didn't get a score. What I did test out, for example, too, is like I tried to do a deep fake. Like I wasn't in front of the camera. I was to the side of the camera and just typed my answers and had a deep fake voice my answers. And actually, what I learned is that I still got a score. So there isn't even like minimum security protocols in there, which I think could actually really hurt companies, that you could have people swap out, or there's actually not a human in front of the camera taking these job assessments. And even the FBI put out a statement last summer said, warning companies for like two things, that like, there might be impersonation and the wrong people may show up for the first day of work, or people might be using deep fakes, but also like this could be a real security threat for folks, because in the first day of a remote job, you maybe give a new employee access to your systems, and that could be really problematic. But I was really interested, what happens in these edge cases, like in people who speak a different language, or have an accent, or have a disability. So the way I tested these tools is I spoke German to them. And I want to it's a 1 minute quick audio that we tested, and let's see what happened here.
So, Hilke, you also tried speaking German to my interview, and you got a score there too.
I did get a score, but first I got a transcript of what I said.
Okay, so this is what it interpreted your words to be. And I'm just going to read from the transcript here, which does not make a lot of sense. So, humidity is a desk, a beat up. Sociology does it iron. Mind material, nematode adapt. Secure location, Masons the first half gamma, their fortunes in.
Yep, it's gibberish.
Okay, what results did you get from this?
I was scored a 73% match for the role, although I didn't speak a word of English, and the things I said in German had nothing to do with the questions I was asked or with the job itself.
Because you were reading a German Wikipedia page.
Yeah, actually, 73% is pretty high. And I wanted to make sure this language discovery was just not based on me speaking German. So one of the graduate students who I work with was kind enough to record herself in Chinese reading the same Wikipedia text. She scored 80%, and her English transcript is gibberish, just like mine.
Right, bringing us back one.
So I think that sort of is kind of interesting, and I think anyone can test these tools this way, right? It doesn't have to just be me. And as a journalist, I obviously, before publication, we always reach out to the companies to get their comment and their feedback. And here's what, and I got generously, the company allowed me to tape the recording, and here's what they said when I.
Before we go, we want you to know we told the companies behind the systems we tested about what we did and about our results. And this is what we heard back. Curious Thing AI thanked us for testing their system. My interview did too, and they also got on the phone with us to talk about what we found.
It knows that you weren't speaking English, for sure.
Clayton Donnelly is my interview's industrial organizational psychologist.
But then it defaults to audio only. Then it won't use your content. Because the content, you can see, it's like, it's random. It's random nonsense. So it won't read that at all unless we tell it to do that.
So you were saying it didn't take the transcript at all into consideration, just the intonation of my voice. And I scored a 73% match. Like the intonation of my voice was a 73% match with the role.
Yeah, well done.
Okay, so he says the system understood that you weren't speaking English.
But if the system scored me on the intonation of my voice alone, I still don't understand how it could pull a full personality analysis on me, showing, for example, that I'm way more innovative than consistent. How do you find that in the sound of my voice? So we then, talk to experts in industrial and organizational psychology about this. But I think it's interesting. I thought I wouldn't get a result back, and I did get a result back. So that was really, really interesting for us. I also wanted, one last hiring tool is gamified assessment. So we see this a lot in banking and investment banking as an AI screen, and I think it appeals to a lot of HR folks out there because it has, the companies say that you can kind of look under the hood of a applicant and sort of understand what makes them tick, like who are they really? And I think a lot of tools appeal to that. And this idea of gamified assessment, sort of this idea that folks play a game, and while they're playing a game, they sort of reveal who they are, certain personality traits, and certain their propensity for risk taking, how much effort they put into something. And I think it's really appealing to companies who like to use this, especially on young graduates, because similar problem, they get a lot of applications. And folks, they don't have 10 years of job experience. It might be hard to understand, okay, who are they really? Would they be good for the job? So maybe looking at like, okay, if people already in the job, they have to play the game. So maybe you have 50 accountants, you let them play the game. And they play this game here, which is the balloon game where you blow up balloons. This doesn't have any sound, but you can see a little bit how these games look like. Here I start, and you have to pump up the balloon and collect and make as much money as you can. So you have the people in the role play this, and if they have, for example, are risk takers in the job, and they put a lot of effort into these games compared to the general population, then the AI tool will look for job seekers who play the game. Are they like that? Do they also have a propensity for risk taking, for example? So this is one of the gamified assessments that I played. But the question here is like, it might be that I'm a daredevil in video games, but am I really a risk taker in real life, right? And I think that connection isn't a whole lot clear and explained. And then I think, especially with jobs, right? Like if we want to do something in hiring or at work, we really want to hire the people who have the right traits to do the job. And the question here is like, is risk behavior really part of the job? Or is it just something that those 50 accountants have in common, right? And it has actually nothing to do with the job. Do you have to be really a risk taker in this particular job as an accountant? So you might be just looking at random things that have nothing to do with the job. And you really, I think most companies wouldn't want to hire for that. And, it might also that those behaviors are correlated to maybe more white men versus people of color. And then you have like bring in potential discrimination through the back door. And I think what's also interesting is that a lot of these tools are calibrated on people who are successful in the job. Because, you think like, oh yeah, then I look for that. But I talked to one industrial organizational psychologist who was actually like, oh yeah, we thought that too. So they were assessing, what made nurses in this particular hospital system, what made successful nurses stand out? What was the key? What should they be looking for in hiring? So when they looked at what do successful nurses have in common versus the general population, they found out that successful nurses were much more compassionate than the general population. So anyone, and I'm a layperson, I would be like, oh yeah, let's look for compassion and let's hire those nurses. They're going to be successful here. Well, it turns out when they looked at unsuccessful nurses in the job, they also actually were more compassionate than the general population. So it just turns out compassion in this space was actually something that all nurses had in common, and that wasn't the deciding factor if somebody was going to be successful. So when they looked a little deeper, they found out that the nurses that were successful in this hospital system were conscientious. So you can see how easily you could look for the wrong traits here if you don't have like a absolutely clear methodology, and you're very skeptical about what you are looking for. And I think I really wanted to talk about this other one of the other games in this suite. It's called Hard Task and Easy Task, and folks are being asked to choose a hard task or easy task. And if you choose a hard task, you are asked to hit the space bar as fast as possible. So there's a couple of problems here. Is like, first of all, I think a lot of people like me when I was playing the game were kind of like, what does it have to do hitting the space bar with with a job. Like I've never had to hit the space bar as fast as I can in a job. Like what does this actually check about a job? I think that's a question. But then also I played this game with somebody who has a disability, and he was very concerned that if somebody had a motor disability in their hand, like how could they play this game and hit the space bar as fast as possible? And they might be as qualified for the job as any other person, but because of this, weird assessment or measurement, they might get thrown out and rejected. And I think that is a real problem with a lot of folks who have a disability in the space, that people who develop these tools are not necessarily don't think about folks who have maybe different abilities. And there's a real conundrum here that like people who have a disability are already underrepresented in the workforce, right? They have double the unemployment rate as people who don't have a disability. So they're often not represented in the training data, or only minimally represented in the training data. And then a lot of disabilities are expressed individually. So maybe if you have one or two autistic employees in your training data, but that doesn't mean that the third applicant who's also autistic has the same sort of data. Their disability may be expressed very differently. So there's a real problem how to get this like round in a square. And it's really concerning. And I think what was also concerning in my reporting is that like, a lot of companies say, oh, but we do offer an accommodation, and people should just choose that before they start playing any of these games. But for people with disabilities, they often feel like, well, I don't want to tell folks that I have a disability because I'm afraid I'm going to land on pile B, the resumes or the data that no one looks at. But also some of them said, like, I don't even know what I'm being asked to do in these games. So how can I ask for an accommodation? And then lastly, what was pretty interesting and shocking to me is I talked to two vocational counselors who work with people with disabilities to find them employment. And they said they had asked for 20, 30 accommodations. They never heard back from their companies. And I think that is really concerning, because this is a law that with the American of Disabilities Act, companies absolutely need to offer this accommodation. And, there's more research to be done. But I think that's really interesting to think about and do these tests, like have people in mind who are not like you, who are different than you, and like have a much more broader spectrum, and sort of understand, do these tools work for people that are different? And the last technology I just wanted to quickly talk about, and I think it's another method that I use to hold algorithms accountable, is our social media background checks. So they can be used on current employees, and they're called continuous background checks, where companies check our social media and LinkedIn and all of that continuously. And then they're also often used in hiring decisions, where you can do a social media test. And again, this is like a personality test that, is supposed to find how dominant you are, how conscientious, and it's supposedly based on traditional personality tests. And, there are already questions about traditional personality tests and hiring, because they only explain 5% to 10% of our success in a job. So there's a lot of 90% of how successful we are in a job is actually not part of our personality, because we can, exceed and change our personality. And, often it's about the task of the job. So it's already kind of a flawed thing. But here, these AI tools say that they can find our personality traits within our writing on social media or on LinkedIn. So whatever I put on my resume is sort of a reflection of who I really am under the hood. So we tested that with traditional personality tests. So I just brought like a couple of minutes here. Oops. Let me get to the video.
Advances in artificial intelligence has the potential to revolutionize hiring.
How this tool works.
Face challenges up front, that's true. Be decisive and achieve results.
check.
So Jason, on your DISC score, you score the highest on calculativeness here. Your score is 8 out of 10. These are all scores out of 10. So that's a pretty high score. And then on dominance, you score 6.9. So which is a high score, but not a very high score. The next higher one is influence, which is 5.6. How the people side of things by and large. So okay on that front. And then steadiness, which is 4.6. So which is the lowest of all these 4 scores.
I just wonder,
So that is his
in terms of the picture that
AI
you're getting,
check.
how companies are going to be confident that it's a real reflection of that of a personality.
So I know that most of the times it's telling me the right thing. We've benchmarked ourselves 75 to 80% accurate. Traditional assessment, a questionnaire-based assessment, around 82% accurate.
Kalkat's referring to questionnaire-based personality assessments, which have been around for decades.
I actually did one of the personality tests.
Yeah.
It's the one that DeepSense uses as its benchmark. My results were similar in 2 of the 4 categories, but the discrepancy is wide in 2 others.
And how confident are you that DeepSense is giving me a more accurate score than one of these personality exams?
See, based on what the results we have.
So I'm going to stop it here.
So
go back to the slide. And I think what I learned here is if the AI tool is supposedly based on traditional methods, use those to test AI, right? And and I understand that 1 journalist or 2 or 3 or 4 is not a large sample size, so it might just tell you, okay, this isn't really working right. But I think what might be helpful, so I tested this also with an AI expert together, and we had very different scores on Twitter and LinkedIn with the same AI tool. So either we have multiple personalities, or these tools don't work, right? You would assume that they don't always have the same score, but roughly the same score on my conscientiousness on LinkedIn and Twitter, if there's any truth to it, that you can find my personality traits on my social media writings. And I think, I was really interested in sort of can we actually do a much broader audit here? So I work with a computer scientist and a sociologist and industrial organizational psychologist at NYU and others, and we actually used resumes and Twitter profiles from over 90 students and found exactly similar trends. The 2 AI tools were supposed to find the same personality traits, but they found everyone get very, very different numbers. And we even found out that if you had a different file type, if you maybe had a raw text versus a PDF document of the same resume, we got slightly different personality results. So I wanted to share this all about hiring, because I do think that hiring matters. And, it's most of us do need to work, and most of us need money to have a roof over our head and feed our children. And a job is a big deal to most of us. And it's also a good job is worth its weight in gold, because our identity and happiness, they're often connected to it. So I know that a lot of job applicants get rejected all the time, and as a job seeker, folks are really used to that. But I do think really thinking through these methods and how we use AI data analysis in some of these high stakes areas is super important, because it does matter. And if I was a job applicant and, applying for my dream job, and I would get rejected, and I would find out it was because I wasn't the most qualified person, or there were others that were more qualified, or I didn't have the right traits and skills, I totally would get it. I would obviously be unhappy, but that's such is life. But if I would find out that it was because, I had the word woman on my resume and I was downgraded, I would be absolutely upset. That's not okay. So I wanted to just share a couple more things of holding AI accountable that is not necessarily out of hiring, but other work that I've done. So here is, for example, a facial recognition tool that we tested, which was kind of interesting because the company told us that it had fixed this bug where folks could hold up photos and get in. But when we got there, we just tried it out on a whim. We wanted to recount the story of how they tried the facial recognition software at this school early on, found out that you could hold up photos. lo and behold, when we showed up and held a photo, somebody could get in. So I think really thinking through, okay, how are vendors advertising this? What do they say how the system works, and actually fact checking that can be really, really helpful in this space. Oh, here's another example. I'm not going to play the video, but here's a company based in Israel that has said that they found if people are a terrorist or pedophile based on their facial expressions. So what we did to test this is we bought our own data set of photos of convicted terrorists and ran it through the classifying system. And what was interesting and maybe expected was that folks that are white people that were convicted of terrorism, they were inferred as non-terrorists, and people who were of Middle Eastern descent were inferred, and were convicted terrorists, were inferred as terrorists. So there's probably some racial bias there, and I'm pretty sure this tool doesn't work. But I wanted to, like, these are sort of all the tests, right? Like, bring your own data sets for testing, ask skeptical questions, ask for accuracy, validation test, benchmark algorithms in small tests against traditional assessment, right? If it's based on personality, on a traditional personality test, like, use those to benchmark the tools against each other. Do they measure the same thing? If you use algorithms against each other. So if two algorithms say they can find my personality out of my Twitter and LinkedIn, well, do they? Because if they have very different numbers, at least one of the tools doesn't work. And then I can go back to, like, maybe do some more testing with traditional assessments. Create edge cases and test the tools yourself. So what I did with, like, speaking German, deep faking my voice, those are all pretty easy test cases to test some of these algorithms. I use also freedom of information requests, so to understand what is the assumption and how do companies and government entities or public entities build these systems. And I think that could be really helpful, and anyone can use freedom of information requests. You don't have to be a journalist or a lawyer. So that could be done. And I think in the European Union, I found a couple of job seekers who actually use GDPR, the General Data Protection law, to get their data and actually push back against companies using some of these AI tools, and actually got a settlement. And then also partner with academics to build larger studies. I think that would be really helpful. Like, we would love to do some of this testing. Like, I actually think in hiring, if we would find companies who could, maybe have to hire a lot of folks and use them with traditional hiring methods, and also use AI tools, and have the labels of, like, yes, hire them, no, maybe, with the people that obviously don't tell your employees, but like just follow them for a long period of time to actually understand, did this tool actually predict who's going to be successful in the job? Same with traditional hiring methods. Like, can we have these, like, long-term studies? And I think it would be really helpful for humanity. And then one other idea, which is, maybe the heaviest lift of them all, is like folks could crowdsource their data and ask people to send them maybe their transparency results, their data results, and AI tools, if they have done this in the European Union or in other jurisdiction where we have more need for compliance. So I think that could be something. But that's where I wanted to end. I have a bunch of other tests that I could share with people, but I think this is, like, sort of gives you the best overview of, like, how we can push and test some of these AI tools that maybe you have not built yourself, and maybe want to buy something from a vendor. And I think might be also helpful for, I hope, for data scientists as well, to think through, okay, like, what are some other use cases? Who could be actually subjected to use these AI tools that I'm building, and who are these people, and how can I make sure that my tool doesn't induce discrimination or other harm? And I think we all want to work towards that, and I think this is more of a tale of the unintended consequences, that I think a lot of people wanted to democratize hiring and wanted to use these tools as a one size fits all that is more democratic, as the vendor said. And I think it a lot of this has backfired. So I wanted to thank you all for staying so long and listening to me speak, and I'm so excited to answer any questions. And here's my you can email me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I love to talk with people in the space. Thank you.
Excellent. Hilke, thank you so much.
Yes, I have to go back to the, let me go to all these other photos that we never talked about here.
Oh yeah, perfect.
There we go.
Perfect. Mind reader. Excellent. Well, thanks so much. This was really amazing. And as you can see, folks have been adding questions as we go along. And I just want to encourage folks who have not had a chance to do that. You add ideas to this easy retro board by clicking on the plus sign in the relevant column, and you can go ahead and type in your idea. When you're finished, just hit the little blue box with a thin white check mark and save within the same field. And then your idea is going to be available for the public's reaction. So I encourage you to add questions here. And if you're unable to figure that out, you can message me in the chat box and I will add your question on your behalf. But Hilke, I'm going to let you navigate your way through these. We've got a lot of good questions. It looks like there is a quick point of clarification that you might want to start with, and I'm going to leave you to it.
Oh, I missed the full name of the researcher who's doing the work on recognizing bias keyword. Yeah, his name is Dr. John Scott, and he's with APT Metrics. So he is industrials organizational psychologist who often gets called in by companies to check some of these systems. His company is also in the assessment space, and they build some of their own, or they recommend other companies' tools. So they build sort of assessment tools for companies. And then I have some other questions here. Holding AI accountable, is there a standard for these tools? It looks like it is unique to each company. Yes, there is no standard. So I think that's one of the problems. We do have laws in this space, and it took me a long time to understand what those laws are in hiring and employment. And I think what's really interesting is that what we have through the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission is guidelines from 1978 that state that tools, one of the tests that companies can do is like check if men and women go through the assessments at somewhat equal rates. So maybe if 10,000, if 1,000 men apply and 800 go through it, and you have 100 women apply, then like 64 women need to go through. So it's the same 80% ratio to 100%. And you can do the same test with people from different racial backgrounds. So we see that a lot of these companies in the AI world use those tests, and they do the 4/5 rule test, which it's called. But that just looks for racial and potential gender discrimination. That actually doesn't look for if the tools are valid and work. It just looks like, do they discriminate? And actually, U.S. regulators do not look for that if the tool works or not. They just assume that you have your best interest of your business in mind and would use something that is actually helpful. So it is unfortunately unique to each company, and some of the vendors also have tools that are not calibrated on each company's data, but just work out of the box. And so they may be used by a lot of companies. It seems to me that AI disproportionately hurts women. Would you agree? What are ways to hold people and organizations liable? So I think that is a real problem. I think that we see in these AI tools is like people who have already been marginalized and underrepresented in the workforce. That marginalization sort of gets amplified here, right? Because we have maybe for some companies who have traditionally hired more men than women, when you put the resumes of those mostly men that are successful in the job into a tool, it will read out that like preferences of men are what makes you successful at this job, right? So a lot of women who don't have the same preferences will be rejected by these tools. So I think there is a real problem here with with liability. And I sort of talk about this. I don't think there's a conspiracy or anything. There's a little bit of cloak of silence, right? Because vendors don't want to say if their tools don't work or have problems or discriminate against people. But the companies that use these tools also don't want to talk about it because they're are very afraid of liability claims, right? Like if a company comes out and says like, oh yeah, we used this flawed algorithm that discriminated everyone with the word softball on their resume and we rejected them. And you may have used this for 2 years on all of your resumes in a company, in a large company. You may have discriminated against tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of women. And there are definitely lawyers there that would love to do a class action lawsuit, right? So I think there is sort of a problem, a lack of transparency in the space and a lack of liability. And the law is not in favor of job applicants because if you want to sue some of these companies for potential discrimination, you have to show that you've been harmed. But most job seekers don't know that AI is being used on them. And they certainly don't know in what way and how they have been harmed. They can just say, like, I used this, AI screen and I didn't get the job. But we don't have the right to your own data in the United States. We could maybe ask for your own data and sort of piece together what has actually happened here. Also along these lines, are these tools using past history? For example, is there objectively reasons for using baseball for a non-sports company? So I did find that too. I thought, when I first started the reporting, I talked to an employment lawyer who had found that the name Jared and playing lacrosse in high school were predictors of success in one resume screener. And for a moment, I was like, maybe this tool found like the magic that like playing lacrosse in high school does make you so much better for this non-sport jobs in sales or something. But the lawyers started laughing at me. He's like, no, you're thinking that there's some sort of magic, but this is like statistical inferences. Like it just found playing lacrosse in high school and a bunch of resumes. Like this is not like the tool didn't find like the secret sauce of hiring, that if we would just look at people who have that played lacrosse in high school are better salespeople or better administrative assistants or something like that. So yeah, no, there's no objective reasons for using baseball for a non-sports company. So I think it's just like that comes up in like semi-supervised or non-supervised AI tools that people use. If they don't keep supervising and understanding, okay, what are the keywords that the tool scores on? These kinds of problems can come back in again and again. I'm going to go back to holding AI accountable, but I also wanted to look at some of the journalism and AI questions. Did you find that approaching these companies as a journalist made them more likely to open their doors and reveal their signs and processes? Were companies more likely to speak with you in an effort to expose their weaknesses and address them? So I think it was really interesting, like in early 2018, like a lot of companies, the field was just starting out. We saw a real push of AI tools going into HR. And I think, at the time I was working for the Wall Street Journal, and I think that was really helpful because, it's considered like a very business friendly paper, although we do, traditional journalism as anyone would at the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or the Washington Post. But yeah, so a lot of companies were much more open to show me their tools. I also booked a lot of demos. I sometimes, often you get a free trial. So I got a lot of, you can do like a 40-day free trial, and I put in my name, and, they could have checked who's testing the software. For Curious Thing AI, where I got the 6 out of 9 English competent when I was speaking German, is another test I did. I bought a monthly subscription for $200 and did that. So I don't think companies were excited when I went back to them and said like, oh, I found maybe this problem here. Do you want to comment on that? But that is just part of journalism. Do you use ChatGPT or other large language models in your own journalism process? If so, how? So I've actually just used some of it to generate visuals. So for the cover of my book, I wanted to see what sort of DALL-E and other generative visuals are doing, and I put in some keywords, and it was just like very mediocre. That was my take on it. It's just a lot of zeros and ones and blue and robot shaking hands of humans, and I really didn't want that, because the truth is these are not robots. This is software that judges people or infers who we are and how qualified we are. So I use ChatGPT a lot to figure out, like, okay, what is it saying? But I always check for accuracy. I think it might be really helpful for folks for whom, like, English maybe is a second language, and they could send complicated questions to ChatGPT to help them polish, like kind of maybe a Grammarly on steroids. But I don't use it for research because of the hallucinations and inaccuracy. I sometimes use it to test it, like, where would the research go and what do I really find out and what is accurate here. Though the risks of relying too much on AI or other technologies are great, what are some of the ways we might employ human-centered practices to use these tools more ethically? In addition to fighting against the harms and risks discussed today, what are ways we can include the human mind with the use of these technologies for positive change? So I think there is actually a great use case for using humans to supervise some of these tools, because I think, I have nothing against resume screening. I think we have to, like, be very clear about the limitations. So, like, how effective is a resume for hiring? It's very low predictive value, but maybe it's the only thing you have. But you have to just consistently monitoring it and make sure that it finds synonyms and doesn't throw people out who use similar words, like a reporter or journalist, to describe the same job, because it hasn't learned any of the synonyms or look for, like, biased variables. Some AI tool vendors allow the use of zip codes, which is, looks kind of neutral on its face, but it's actually, we have a history of redlining in the United States. So people live in different neighborhoods. So it can be really problematic and bring discrimination in from the background. So you have to continuously monitor the system. And I think there is a real place for that. And I'm just going to put in John Scott's company in the chat. It's called APT Metrics. And then let's see, is there any analysis out there regarding the facial analysis and microexpression and race, considering the difficult facial recognition technology has been known to have much lower accuracy rates for people with darker skin tone. I would assume it would have much more difficult time. Yes, so we have a little bit of research in there, and one is Lauren Wu. I'm going to put her name in the chat, who looked at facial recognition software or facial emotion recognition software and facial expressions in white and black basketball players, and found out that although their lips had the same curvature for some of the African American men, it was assumed that they're more angry than happy. So we maybe see a difference there. I don't think we've seen large scale studies, so we just have, like, these little signals. You mentioned that there's no science behind intonation of voices or facial expressions to determine success in a role. I can't really see. Is there a question, Amanda?
There is not. I am actually appearing on
how
this.
are these tools perpetuated, carried forward as if they're best practices? I think that's sort of a real problem, right? I think this is like a problem that we don't have to show that these tools work, are valid, and don't discriminate in the United States. And I'm not saying that the government has to step in and we have to do that, but I think we need to have a little bit more transparency and explainability. So I think if job seekers would understand, like, how they're being objectified, or like classified and ranked by AI, and on one criteria, I think that would be really actually helpful for researchers and job seekers, maybe themselves. And I think the problem is that a lot of companies use deep neural networks, and you don't have to know what that means, but it often means that we know the training data going in and we know the results, but we don't actually know what is classified inside the tools, what exact keywords, what exact facial expression. We can ask computers to tell us a little bit, but often it is unknown. So I think that strikes me as very risky in high-risk decision-making, right? Like, if you use that to sort my emails, maybe I wouldn't be so there might not be a high stakes decision making to what goes into my spam folder, but if I get a job, it is. So I think if we don't know how a system infers success, if somebody is successful or ranks them, I think we have a real problem. So I think explainability, and I think that sort of explains a little bit the next question, is really, really important here. And I think we see some regulation moving in that way, especially in the European Union, where I was really, excited to see that hiring and employment discrimination and AI tools in employment are classified as high risk in the new AI Act. So I think that could be really helpful. How do they use games to test for leadership and team player? Very important for hiring managers.
I'm going to make sure this is the very last question.
Okay, perfect. So I think, I'm going to actually answer the last question. Looks like AI have the same problems as the face-to-face interview. Yes, so humans are flawed, and humans have unconscious bias in hiring, and we don't want to go back to those days because they have we have a problem for underestimating women and people of color and people with disabilities for decades, right? So we don't want to go back there, but the flaw here is like, we don't want to build historical bias now into the next system that now looks objectively better. And also because, it's mathematicized and it looks like this is an objective ranking. But I also think the scope is just so very different, right? Like a human biased hiring manager, they can harm, maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 people a year, who knows? But like a tool that is used on 3 million applicants, the potential discrimination is just so much more vast. And I think, I think we should have a larger conversation, like how should we hire? The human hiring doesn't work. These tools where we just more or less have digitized human hiring is also largely not working. There are tons of problems that are found out. Like, how should we hire? What are good processes? Can we do more holistic hiring where we do assessments and job interviews and not these like fast screens where you play a game and either you have the same personality traits or thinking styles or whatever, then the applicants you out. That doesn't seem necessarily fair and takes into account maybe the person has the right skill, and maybe another assessment would be helpful. So I think to think really through that, but I think that will take a lot of money and time, and I know it would be a burden on companies.
Mm. Yep. Oh goodness, such a great place to end. I know that I could sit here and listen to.
I know. Thank you so much for staying with us and all these questions.
Yeah, so many great questions. That balloon test is going to be stressing me out. Like,
and the balloon test you can actually do online too. So there's like, niches of folks who are trying to help job seekers. So you can play the balloon.
Right. Okay. Well, good to know. But thanks so much for everyone who joined us today and made this into a really rich discussion at the end. It was great conversations, great questions. We do very much appreciate you all being here. We hope that you will complete our evaluation. You'll see it when we close up the Zoom. Zoom will send that over to you on your screen. If you're interested in becoming a DataBytes speaker, please let me know. There is a DataBytes interest form you can complete, and I will also be happy to talk to anyone about that. So you can hop on our website or email me. If we go to our next slide, I am very excited to tell you about a few more programs that we have coming up. Our next DataBytes event, which was just confirmed yesterday, is this really exciting conversation around supporting AI risk management in the analytics lifecycle with Sophia Rowland, and that's going to be taking place on April 30th. You can go ahead and get registered for that event now. Future events that we have that I do want to make sure on your radar include our upcoming career panel, which takes place on Tuesday, March 5th at 5 p.m. We have some wonderful folks from a variety of finance and healthcare and traditional analytics firms and Bank of America who are going to be able to talk a little bit about their career journeys. So we encourage folks to register and sign up for that event. And then finally, we have a very exciting upskilling series called Data Matters that's now in its 10th year. second year of our Spring Ahead edition, but we are offering 6 different classes on a variety of topics with relatively affordable fees and really high quality instruction, live instruction with TA support and everything. So it's really good stuff. Please do take a moment to check that out. And as my colleague Jayshree has mentioned in the chat, check out datascienceconsortium.org for more information about our programs. And other than that, we will see you all soon. Hilke, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.